The soft hum of the city filtered through my penthouse window, mingling with the faint scent of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. I smoothed the silk of my blouse over my shoulders, the cool fabric grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. My phone buzzed insistently on the marble counter. I glanced at the screen. An unknown number. My heart skipped, a flicker of the old tension surfacing. For years, I'd built this life carefully, quietly. Success wasn't flashy. It was deliberate. I had a career that demanded respect, a home that felt like my sanctuary, and a sense of control I hadn't always possessed. But control had a way of being tested. And today it was being tested in the form of a voice from the past, one I thought I'd silenced. "Hey, it's your stepdad," the voice said, hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mom, we're at your house. Well, we thought we could stay for a bit." I felt my stomach tighten. Memories I had long buried, of betrayal, entitlement, and the bitter sting of watching them ignore my father's will, rose unbidden. They had taken, assumed, and never asked. And yet here I was, poised and calm, hiding the storm of anger and resolve behind a practiced smile. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of silk against my skin, the gleam of sunlight on the city streets below, the vibration of my phone. This moment wasn't just a call, it was an invitation. An opportunity to finally set the record straight. I remember the first time I realized my home wasn't really mine. I was 22, freshly out of college, filled with hope and the naive belief that family would support me no matter what. Instead, I found my stepdad moving boxes into my father's house, his son tagging along. All smiles and entitlement. My mother followed behind, her laughter echoing through the halls like a cruel reminder that I wasn't in control. "Jessica, you can't make them leave," my mother said one evening, as I stood at the threshold of my own living room, hands trembling, trying to hold back the tears. "It's your father's generosity. They're family too." Family. That word had lost its meaning for me in that moment. My father had left a will, clear instructions, boundaries meant to protect the life he had built. But they'd ignored every one of them, sneaking in, taking over, assuming ownership without permission or apology. My voice shook when I argued, my hands curling into fists at my sides, the sting of helplessness almost too much to bear. Late at night, I would sit on the edge of my father's old armchair, clutching the silver locket he had given me on my 18th birthday. Inside, his picture smiled up at me, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone, that I could make my own choices. "You're stronger than you think," I whispered to the image, letting the weight of his words seep in. I sought advice from my grandmother, who had always been a pillar of wisdom in my life. She didn't tell me to fight them directly. She told me to plan, to build, to claim my life without losing myself in anger. "The best revenge, Jessica, is to thrive where they can't touch you," she said, her voice gentle but unwavering. That night, I made my decision. I would leave the house, the fights, the constant reminders of betrayal behind. I would carve out a life where my father's values and my own integrity could flourish, where no one could step over me again. The path ahead would be hard, lonely at times, but it was mine. I tucked the locket under my blouse, feeling its cold reassurance against my heart, and I stepped out into the dark, ready to start a life that no one could steal. The first few months after leaving the house were grueling. I rented a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood that hummed with ambition and quiet struggle. The walls were bare, the floors creaked, and I often wondered if I'd made a mistake. But every morning, I would look at my reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, smooth the silk of my blouse over my shoulders, and whisper, "I'm doing this for me." A mentor found me in the most unexpected way. Caroline Bennett, a woman twice my age with an impeccable reputation in the business world, noticed my determination during a networking event. She saw the fire I had tried to bury beneath my frustration and my carefully measured politeness. "You have talent," she said, tapping my resume lightly. "But talent without action is invisible. Let me help you make them notice." Her guidance was rigorous. Long nights blurred into early mornings as I learned not just the mechanics of my new career, but the art of asserting myself in a world that often underestimated young women. I faced rejection after rejection, emails ignored, deals lost, moments where my confidence wavered, but Caroline's voice always cut through my self-doubt. Every small win counts. Build quietly, but build relentlessly. I did. I spent nights poring over contracts, analyzing markets, refining presentations until every detail reflected the woman I was becoming. Slowly, the wins came. My first big client signed a contract with a firm that had always seemed untouchable. I remember clutching the signed papers to my chest in my tiny apartment, heart racing, whispering thanks to the locket my father had given me. The first profitable venture followed, then another. I found myself standing on the threshold of financial independence I had once only dreamed about. But I kept it hidden. I posted modest updates on social media, never letting my family see the truth. I wanted them to believe I was still fragile, still at their mercy. In the quiet corners of my apartment, I celebrated each milestone alone, savoring the irony that my freedom was growing while their entitlement remained unchecked. By the time I moved into a larger office downtown, adorned with art that inspired me and windows that framed the skyline I had claimed as my own, I had transformed, not just in wealth, but in spirit. My resilience had shaped me into someone unrecognizable from the young woman who had trembled at their laughter and disrespect. I had built a life so formidable that no one could dismiss me again, and all without them ever knowing, not yet. I often touched the locket hidden beneath my blouse, feeling the cold reassurance against my skin. It was more than a keepsake. It was a reminder of why I fought, why I endured, and why I thrived in silence. And now, after years of patience, the moment was approaching when silence would no longer be necessary. The knock on my office door was polite but hesitant, the kind that betrayed both expectation and fear. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. My stepdad's familiar, awkward rhythm, my mother's soft, expectant voice carrying just enough false cheer, and the boy, her son, trying to hide his unease behind a forced grin. I rose slowly from my leather chair, smoothing the silk of my blouse as I approached. The office was quiet, spacious, and carefully curated, walls adorned with abstract art, shelves lined with books I had studied obsessively, and a polished oak desk where my laptop and carefully stacked papers signaled control and organization. A soft light bathed the room, highlighting my features, my posture, my calm. I could almost hear the disbelief building before a word had passed my lips. They stepped inside, hesitant. My mother's eyes flicked to the art, the furniture, the skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. My stepdad's gaze lingered on my desk, on the precise charts and portfolios displayed, and the boy, he just stared, uncertainty knitting his brows. I let them take it all in. I gave them enough time to feel the weight of the difference between who they expected and who I had become. The silence stretched, heavy with anticipation, and then I spoke, my voice steady, layered with authority and calm. You've been living in my father's house, believing it was yours to occupy, ignoring the will, assuming my forgiveness. But I've learned something important over the years. You don't get to claim what isn't yours, and you don't get to dictate my life. Their jaws tightened, eyes widening in shock. My mother's lips parted, searching for a defense, a word, a justification, but none came. My stepdad swallowed hard, as if he suddenly realized how far they had overstepped. The boy's posture shifted, a nervous fidget betraying his discomfort. I gestured toward the room. This, I said, sweeping my hand across the office, this is not a display. It's the life I've built, quietly, deliberately, independently. I own my company, my investments, my property. Every step I took, every late night, every setback, every triumph, it's mine and no one else's. I let the words settle, watching as disbelief settled over their faces. My mother's eyes glistened with shame, and my stepdad's usual arrogance crumbled into hesitation. The boy looked between us, suddenly aware of the world I had crafted while they assumed my failure. I moved closer, letting the subtle weight of authority press without malice. The house you've taken, the entitlement you've assumed, it ends today. I am not a child. I am not powerless. And I will not allow anyone to rewrite my father's legacy or mine. I paused, letting them absorb the full impact of my declaration. Then, I smiled, calm, measured, victorious. I wanted you to see this before I spoke. Because now you know that the girl you underestimated is a woman who refuses to be invisible. The truth is clear. I am not only surviving. I am thriving. And everything I touch, I own, including my boundaries. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of revelation. My mother's shoulders slumped, my stepdad's confidence evaporated, and the boys' wide eyes reflected a mixture of awe and shame. They had come expecting weakness. Instead, they found a woman who had turned every slight into a stepping stone, every insult into a lesson, and every betrayal into fuel for success. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted entirely. I could feel the shift in the room like a tangible current. For years, they had assumed the upper hand, believing that my youth, my inexperience, and their audacity gave them power over me. Now, that power had quietly, decisively moved into my hands. And I intended to make it count, not out of spite, but as a lesson in boundaries, growth, and respect. I'm willing to help, I said, my tone calm, measured, yet firm. But it will not be on your terms. It will be on mine, and if you're serious about stepping back into my life, you'll follow them. My mother's eyes flickered with hesitation. I met her gaze, unflinching. Mom, if you want to reconcile, you need to accept responsibility. No more entitlement. No more ignoring the will. You will respect the choices I've made, the rules I've established, and your role will no longer be assumed. You will earn your place. Turning to my stepdad, I let my voice carry authority without aggression. You've spent years thinking authority came from intimidation and manipulation. It doesn't. It comes from integrity, action, and respect. If you truly want to be in my life, you will abandon old patterns, support rather than take, and prove that you can operate without entitlement. The boy, who had grown up seeing my life as something to challenge rather than admire, met my gaze with uncertainty. I softened slightly, offering him a chance rather than a judgment. You are not responsible for their mistakes, I said. But you are responsible for your own. Learn humility, learn accountability, and pursue something meaningful. If you want to be part of this family, it will be on the basis of growth, not assumption. I let the room absorb the conditions, each word deliberate, each pause intentional. This was not punishment. It was an invitation, a framework to rebuild if they were willing. I wasn't asking for blind obedience. I was asking for transformation, for acknowledgement of the past, and for a commitment to future integrity. I could see the weight of realization settling on them. Shame, disbelief, and, finally, acceptance flickered across their faces. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, a sign of internal reckoning. My stepdad's shoulders slumped, his usual arrogance replaced by a tentative respect. The boy's eyes, wide and alert, reflected cautious hope. For the first time in years, I felt the equilibrium tilt toward fairness. I had reclaimed not just my inheritance and my home, but my right to define the terms of my life. Compassion and firmness walked hand in hand. I would not bend to old dynamics, but I would allow growth where it was deserved. Finally, I leaned back, letting the moment linger. I care for you, I said, but care is not a license to harm. If you accept these conditions, we can move forward. If not, you'll understand what it means to lose more than a home. You'll lose trust, respect, and my presence in your lives. The room was quiet, heavy with the weight of choice. And for the first time, I realized that true power isn't in wealth or control or revenge. It's in defining boundaries and giving others the chance to rise to them or fall. Weeks passed, and change, slow, deliberate, and steady, began to take root. My mother started attending counseling, her entitled habits replaced with small acts of thoughtfulness, asking before she visited, listening without judgment, acknowledging mistakes instead of dismissing them. She was learning the weight of accountability, and I felt a quiet pride watching her transformation. My stepdad, surprisingly, began volunteering with a local nonprofit, a subtle but meaningful shift from self-interest to contribution. He still had moments of doubt, but I could see him trying, genuinely trying, to redefine himself beyond the arrogance that had defined him for years. And the boy, once entitled and brash, began pursuing his passions with focus and discipline, seeking my guidance when needed, but never assuming it was owed. I often sat alone in my office at dusk, the skyline glowing as the city settled into evening calm. I would touch the silver locket hidden beneath my blouse, the same locket my father had given me, the one my grandmother had used to remind me of my strength. It had been my anchor through sleepless nights, lonely triumphs, and the uncertainty of my own resolve. Now it felt like a bridge, connecting my past, my growth, and the life I had carefully built. Looking around my home and office, I reflected on the journey. Every late night, every self-doubt, every obstacle had shaped me into the woman I had become. I had endured betrayal, reclaimed my inheritance, and transformed a toxic chapter into one of empowerment and self-respect. The people who once dismissed me were now witnesses to my resilience, and some, even if slowly, were beginning to rise with me, not against me. I stood by the window, the cool breeze brushing against my skin, the city lights twinkling like silent affirmations of my journey. I smiled softly, a mixture of gratitude, pride, and quiet triumph. The locket pressed against my heart reminded me of the lessons learned. Strength is not just about wealth, power, or revenge. It's about standing firm, setting boundaries, and nurturing growth in yourself and in others. And in that stillness, I whispered to myself, a voiceover that only I could hear. I am not defined by those who tried to take from me. I am defined by the life I chose, the boundaries I set, and the strength I never surrendered. Bottom of form,